Hello and welcome. This is DW News live from Berlin. Our coverage of Super Tuesday 2, the US presidential sweepstakes. Trump and Clinton cleaning up, apparently, in Florida. As expected, Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton running away with Florida. She has a commanding lead over Bernie Sanders, and Republican Donald Trump nearly doubling up on his nearest challenger, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Polls have just closed in all 5 states. We're going to have initial results for you right now. My name's Christopher Springate. Good to have you with us. Polls are now closed in all US states holding presidential primaries today. Here is how things are panning out as the counting gets underway in earnest. With about 2/3 of the vote counted in Florida, Republican Donald Trump appears to be claiming the big prize of the evening. He has a solid 20-point lead over Florida native Marco Rubio. It's a drubbing that could well spell the end of the Rubio campaign. We'll keep you posted on that. Further up the East Coast, Trump also leading in North Carolina by a slim margin over Texas Senator Ted Cruz. And a surprise here in Ohio. Early returns showing that Trump has a razor-thin lead over that state's Governor John Kasich. We're going to round up the Democratic results for you as well. Hillary Clinton routing challenger Bernie Sanders in Florida at the moment. She has over 60% of the vote currently. She also maintains a solid lead in North Carolina and appears to be cleaning up in Ohio too. The results in those states still very preliminary, though. We will keep you up to date as the figures roll in. OK, well, to talk about all of this, I have Charlotte Potts with me in the studio, and we also have Richard Walker with us on hand in... Do we have Richard Walker in Florida? I hear that we don't have Richard Walker yet, but I know he's on hand in Florida, so we'll be catching up with him in a minute. Charlotte, so to you first. Rubio well behind Trump in those early projections in Florida. Is this the last day of Rubio's campaign?
It's certainly a huge setback for him. It's his own backyard. He spent so much time there campaigning. He spent so much money on a Florida win. So this was going to be make it or break it. And if it turns out that Rubio, as it looks like right now, is losing that state, it could very well be the last day of his campaign. We've heard media reports tonight that he's pledged to go on campaigning in Utah, in one of the next states coming up. But really, his financial backers are not going to be amused about his loss in Florida tonight. So they might back out of the campaign, his supporters are, and then his campaign will dry up, and we'll have to see.
OK, just need somebody telling me, do we have Richard in Florida? Yes, we do. There he is. Richard Walker, DW's Richard Walker with us from Florida at Marco Rubio's headquarters. Richard, is there any word, do we know when Marco Rubio might come out and talk to the press where you are?
Yeah, no word so far on that, Christopher. I think they're going to want to have a pretty clear view of what's going on. Also, they'll want to kind of synchronize the speeches with the other candidates so that nobody collides. But here, I mean, they're trying to keep the mood up with some pretty upbeat music at the moment. But I think there's a general sense that it's pretty unlikely to be Marco Rubio's night tonight. Some of the people I've been speaking to here are slightly dejected in their tone, saying this has been a crazy year, and any other year Marco Rubio would have done extremely well, but somehow his campaign has simply not managed to get off the ground in the face of that onslaught from Donald Trump. We do have early results here in Florida with maybe a quarter, I think, of the results in showing Trump with a distinct advantage over Marco Rubio. But you shouldn't read too much into those results. They obviously depend on exactly what parts of the state have been reporting earlier. And they were saying here they're really hoping to see results from Miami-Dade, so the area around where we are right now, which is the sort of Marco Rubio stronghold, waiting to see how those results are. But no one really expects Rubio to pull off the major upset that he would need to defeat Donald Trump at this point.
So that would mean, I was just asking Charlotte here in the studio, that really means it's probably the last day of his campaign?
I think it is quite likely. I mean, he has been, he was saying in a radio interview today that he wanted to stay on. You know, they've already put out press releases saying that their campaign is going to head to Utah next. But I'm not sure everyone really believes that. And obviously, we're going to see Marco Rubio himself in person, at least in the next couple of hours. So it'll be very interesting to see, you know, is this going to be a concession speech, not just in his state, but a speech saying, all right, I've had it, it's time for me to drop out? Or is he going to signal that he wants to continue? We'll find out soon enough.
OK, Richard Walker in Miami at the Marco Rubio headquarters there. Thanks for now. We're going to turn back to Charlotte Potts, one of our political correspondents here in the studio. Let's move away from Florida now. Let's talk about Ohio. The early projections actually show Donald Trump with a razor-thin lead over John Kasich. He is the governor of that state. He has to win that state, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. That's also going to be make it or break it for Kasich tonight. As you said, he's the governor, and after the financial crisis, that state of Ohio was really in a lot of turmoil. It's a highly manufacturing state, and Governor Kasich was able to turn it around. So it was going well. He's very popular in that state. But I've talked to a voter last week in Ohio, and he's been saying he totally likes Kasich, but he also believes that Trump is a better candidate because he's a Kasich on steroids. So we'll see if that really turns out to be true. That might be also the end of the campaign for Kasich tonight.
If Trump wins all 5 states, and that still could be a possibility, that would seem to suggest that all the controversy over the incidents of violence at his rallies in recent days hasn't really damaged him.
Yes, that's very interesting. I think Marco Rubio was hoping for that tonight, that would really make a difference in Florida. Those protests, this violence we've seen over the last weekend, happening at the Trump rallies, and also that kind of backlash that Trump has experienced. That President Obama today, for example, he said that there has been a violent rhetoric that has been sparking this violence at the rallies. So. Apparently, this hasn't gone down with voters as something bad, and Trump has really managed to mobilize a lot of non-voters, a lot of angry voters, a whole new group of the American electorate that doesn't care about these incidences.
Let's talk about the Democrats as well. Very much expected Hillary Clinton well ahead in Florida, also North Carolina. We don't have any projections, reliable projections yet for the other states. Could Bernie Sanders, her left-wing challenger, pull the kind of surprise on her that he did in Michigan?
Yeah, as you said, Michigan was really a big surprise last week. I think he was so popular in Michigan and now in Ohio as well because he does well with workers. There are a lot of blue-collar workers, manufacturing-heavy state, and he has been tapping into that kind of fear of free trade agreements that are discussed right now with the Pacific and also the transatlantic one. So Bernie Sanders has strongly opposed that, and that has sat well with voters in that state of Ohio. So we'll see. Clinton really needs those voters definitely in the general election. If she becomes the nominee, those working-class voters, she's been very popular with them in 2008 when she ran against Barack Obama. So this is going to be really interesting in Ohio tonight.
OK, but just to wrap this up for us, Charlotte, essentially what we're looking at now are the 2 front-runners cementing their leads.
It seems like it, yeah. It seems very well like it. It's a crucial night. The Republican establishment has long tried to stop Trump from becoming the nominee of their party. If he wins in all 5 states tonight, it does look very likely. Hillary Clinton now has the most delegates of all candidates together, more than Trump, more than Sanders. So she is most likely going to be the nominee. So very crucial night tonight. We'll see.
OK, Charlotte Potts, thank you for all that background. We're just going to go back to Richard Walker at the Rubio headquarters in Miami. Richard, are you hearing anything from the Republican establishment? Are there moves among the Republican establishment to basically separate themselves from Rubio and his campaign?
Well, I mean, I think we're going to have to see what happens tonight, Christopher. But obviously, the focus is shifting really in two directions. There are some who are looking to Cruz, as the only person, as Cruz himself says, who has won a significant number of states against Donald Trump. And there are others who look at John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, if he does manage to win tonight in his home state, looking at him as someone who could potentially do better in the states to come than Ted Cruz could. But really neither of them have a significant chance of actually getting the majority of delegates. 1,237 is this golden number in the Republican Party. Neither of them really has a significant chance of getting that number of delegates. So all it really becomes about is trying to block Donald Trump from getting that majority himself, so that when you come to the convention in July, which is usually just a moment where the candidate gets anointed as the nominee, that could be a contested convention where Donald Trump does not have the majority and the so-called establishment tries to fall in behind one of the other candidates or parachute someone else in entirely. But of course, that's very dangerous territory. And even some of the people I've been speaking to here have been saying, you know, does the party really want to go there? Because that is really guaranteed civil war. Of course, the civil war, some would say, has already broken out in the Republican Party, but that could be very, very messy indeed if they want to go down that path.
OK, Richard Walker in Miami, thank you very much for all that background. And we are going to move on to some of the other news. Efforts to bring peace to Syria, for instance, appear to be gathering pace. US Secretary of State John Kerry due to travel to Moscow next week to discuss the implications of Russia's military withdrawal from Syria. Kerry says he'll be meeting President Vladimir Putin to talk about a political transition in the country. Russia, meanwhile, has started pulling out some of its combat jets a day after Putin's surprise announcement that they have achieved their objectives in Syria.
Russia is packing up. Their partial pullout has begun. These are Russian TV pictures of their Latakia airbase in Syria. The first fighter jets have already returned home. Russia's move has changed the momentum at the Syria peace talks in Geneva. The UN Special Envoy to Syria welcomed it as a, quote, significant development, and so did the opposition.
We got now some kind of promise that the political solution is the solution, and why we're here, because this is a positive thing for us toward a good, sustainable solution for our people to stop to die.
270,000 people have died since the beginning of the Syrian civil war 5 years ago, amongst them many children. UNICEF says 900 children died last year alone, but the current lull in the fighting has given rise to hope. Still, a ceasefire alone is not enough, argues the head of the UN inquiry on human rights in Syria.
The adoption of measures that lay the ground for accountability need not and should not wait for a final peace agreement to be reached.
A reference to war crimes committed during the conflict. The opposition is demanding an interim government without President al-Assad, with Russian military support falling away that could finally be on the table.
OK, we're going to go back to the US presidential race. Florida Senator Marco Rubio currently addressing the media and his supporters in Miami. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Don't worry, you won't get beat up at our event. People are very frustrated about the direction of our country. Thank you. Thank you. People are frustrated. In 2007 and 2008, there was a horrible downturn in our economy. And these changes to our economy that are happening are disrupting people's lives. And people are very upset about it. And they're told that, people are angry, they're frustrated, they're being left behind by this economy. And then they're told, look, if you're against illegal immigration, that makes you a bigot. And if you see jobs and businesses leaving to other countries, you have no right to be frustrated. They see America involved in the world and Americans spending money and losing their lives, and they see that there's very little gratitude for all the sacrifice America makes. And quite frankly, there's millions of people in this country that are tired of being looked down upon, tired of being told by these self-proclaimed elitists that they don't know what they're talking about and they need to instead listen to the so-called smart people. And I know all these issues firsthand. I've lived paycheck to paycheck. I grew up paycheck to paycheck. I know what it's like to have to figure out how to find the money to fix the air conditioner that broke last night. I know my parents struggled, and I know millions of people that are doing that. I know immigration in America is broken. No one understands this issue better than I do. My parents are immigrants. My grandparents were immigrants. Jeanette's parents were immigrants. I live in a community of immigrants. I've seen the good and the bad and the ugly. I've battled my whole life against the so-called elites, the people who think that, I needed to wait my turn or wait in line or it wasn't our chance or it wasn't our time. So I understand all of these frustrations. And yet when I decided to run for president, I decided to run a campaign that was realistic about all of these challenges, but also one that was optimistic about what lies ahead for our country. I know that we have a right to enforce our immigration laws, but we also have to have a realistic approach to fix it. I know that we are living through this extraordinary economic transformation that is really disruptive in people's lives. Machines are replacing them. Their pay is not enough. I know it's disruptive, but I also know this new economy has incredible opportunity. I know America can't solve all of the world's problems, but I also know that when America doesn't lead, it leaves behind a vacuum, and that vacuum leads to chaos. And most of all, I know firsthand that ours is a special nation, because where you come from here doesn't decide where you get to go. That's how a 44-year-old son of a bartender and a maid, that's how I decide that, in fact, I too can run for president of the United States of America. So, from a political standpoint, the easiest thing to have done in this campaign is to jump on all those anxieties I just talked about, to make people angrier, make people more frustrated. But I chose a different route, and I'm proud of that. Because that would have been, in a year like this, that would have been the easiest way to win. But that is not what's best for America. The politics of resentment against other people will not just leave us a fractured party. They're going to leave us a fractured nation. They're going to leave us as a nation where people literally hate each other because they have different political opinions. That we find ourselves at this point is not surprising, for the warning signs have been here for close to a decade. In 2010, the Tea Party wave carried me and others into office because not enough was happening, and that Tea Party wave gave Republicans a majority in the House. But nothing changed. In 2014, those same voters gave Republicans a majority in the Senate, and still nothing changed. And I blame some of that on the conservative movement, a movement that is supposed to be about our principles and our ideas, but I blame most of it on our political establishment. A political establishment that for far too long has looked down at conservatives as simple-minded people, looked down at conservatives as simply bomb throwers. A political establishment that for far too long has taken the votes of conservatives for granted. And a political establishment that has grown to confuse cronyism for capitalism and big business for free enterprise. I endeavored over the last 11 months to bridge this divide within our party and within our country, because I know that after 8 years of Barack Obama, this nation needs a vibrant and growing conservative movement, and it needs a strong Republican Party to change the direction now of this country, or many of the things that are going wrong in America will become permanent, and many of the things that make us a special country will be gone. America needs a vibrant conservative movement, but one that's built on principles and on ideas, not on fear, not on anger, not on preying on people's frustrations. A conservative movement that believes in the principles of our Constitution, that protects our rights and limits the power of government. A conservative movement committed to the cause of free enterprise, the only economic model where everyone can climb without anyone falling. A conservative movement that believes in a strong national defense, and a conservative movement that believes in the strong Judeo-Christian values that are the formation of our nation. But we also need a new political establishment in our party. Not one that looks down on people that live outside of the District of Columbia. Not one that tells young people that they need to wait their turn and wait in line. And not one that's more interested in winning elections than it is in solving problems or standing by principles. And this is the campaign we've run. A campaign that is realistic about the challenges we face, but optimistic about the opportunities before us. A campaign that recognizes the difficulties we face, but also one that believes that we truly are on the verge of a new American century. And a campaign to be president, a campaign to be a president that would love all of the American people, even the ones that don't love you back. This is the right way forward for our party. This is the right way forward for our country. But after tonight, it is clear that while we are on the right side, this year, we will not be on the winning side. I take great comfort in the ancient words which teaches us that in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. And so yet, while this may not have been the year for a hopeful and optimistic message about our future, I still remain hopeful and optimistic about America. And how can I not? How can I not? My mother was one of 7 girls born to a poor family. Her father was disabled as a child. He struggled to provide for them his entire life. My mother told us a few years ago she never went to bed hungry growing up, but she knows her parents did, so they wouldn't have to. She came to this country in 1956 with little education, no money, no connections. My parents struggled their first years here. They were discouraged. They even thought about going back to Cuba at one point, but they persevered. They never became rich. I didn't inherit any money from my parents. They never became famous. You never would have heard of them if I had never run for office. And yet I consider my parents to be very successful people. Because in this country, working hard as a bartender and a maid, they owned a home. And they retired with dignity. In this country, they lived to see all 4 of their children live better off than themselves. And in this country, on this day, my mother, who's now 85 years old, was able to cast a ballot for her son to be the President of the United States of America. And so, And so, while it is not God's plan that I be president in 2016 or maybe ever, and while today my campaign is suspended, the fact that I've even come this far is evidence of how special America truly is. And all the reason more why we must do all we can to ensure that this nation remains a special place. I ask the American people, do not give in to the fear. Do not give in to the frustration. We can disagree about public policy. We can disagree about it vibrantly, passionately. But we are a hopeful people, and we have every right to be hopeful. For we in this nation are the descendants of go-getters. In our veins runs the blood of people who gave it all up so we would have the chances they never did. We are all the descendants of someone who made our future the purpose of their lives. We are the descendants of pilgrims. We are the descendants of settlers. We are the descendants of men and women that headed westward in the Great Plains, not knowing what awaited them. We are the descendants of slaves who overcame that horrible institution to stake their claim in the American dream. We are the descendants of immigrants and exiles who knew.
Marco Rubio, the Florida senator there, appearing to be making the last speech of his presidential campaign, presidential nomination campaign. He just mentioned the words that he is suspending that campaign. Let's go to Miami, Florida, to our correspondent there, DW's Richard Walker. You've been listening to that speech as well, Richard. Would you agree that that is the end of Marco Rubio's campaign?
Yes, it certainly is, Christopher. As you just mentioned there, he uttered those words. As of now, my campaign is suspended. Huge disappointment in the audience here, even when at the beginning of his speech he congratulated Donald Trump on what is looking like a big victory here in his home state of Florida, the victory that meant that there was no real way that Marco Rubio could continue. Big boos here in the audience at that time. But as you can hear, there's a kind of mood of acceptance now here in the crowd and some warm feelings towards Marco Rubio, certainly as a candidate who the people here really pinned their hopes on as the future of the Republican Party, a man who many people really saw represented the future of the Republican Party, an inclusive future, who could have been America's first Hispanic president, a figure who couldn't be more different really from Donald Trump, who obviously represents something more very, very different, something quite divisive on issues of immigration and of the kind of changes in America's demographic makeup.
OK, Richard Walker in Miami, thank you very much for all that background. A quick question here in the studio to Charlotte Potts. That was really a slamming critique of Donald Trump's fiery rhetoric and campaign based on the anxieties of voters rather than the more optimistic themes, and also quite a critique of the US conservative movement. Richard was telling us about civil war within the Conservatives in the US just before that. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it started all with the Tea Party in 2009. That was kind of the more right-wing part of the Republican Party, and they've been staring that frustration within the voters of the Republican Party. So ever since then, there has been really so many different kinds of being Republican, everything from moderate to very right-wing, and that doesn't fit together anymore.
OK, Charlotte Potts, thank you very much for that. Updating the US presidential primaries for you. The first casualty of the evening, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. He's suspended his campaign for the Republican nomination after suffering a heavy loss to frontrunner Donald Trump in his home state. Elsewhere, Democrat Hillary Clinton adding the key states of Florida and North Carolina to her win list. You are watching DW News in Berlin. Do stay with us for plenty more coverage of the US primaries in 5 states. My name is Christopher Springate. Thanks for watching.
DW News coming to you live from Berlin. The victors and the vanquished in the U.S. presidential sweepstakes. Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton has 3 big states under her belt as she cements her status as the favorite for the nomination. The Trump train is rolling too, claiming Florida and North Carolina leading in 2 other states. Florida Senator Marco Rubio faces the consequences of a loss on his home turf. Welcome to the program. I'm Sarah Harmon. The Clinton camp closes in on a clean sweep on Super Tuesday, number 2. Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton claiming victory tonight in the U.S. states of Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio. She's holding on to comfortable leads over challenger Bernie Sanders in Illinois and Missouri. It's been a very good night for the Republican frontrunner, too. Donald Trump putting his stamp on Florida, Illinois, and North Carolina. But don't take it from me. Let's listen to the man himself. He's speaking now live to supporters in Palm Beach.
Side of this country, everybody agrees that the money should be here, and the politicians for 3 years haven't been able to make a deal. And we could make a deal. There's an example of something that you could do if I sat down with a few of the senators, a few of the congressmen. You could make a deal on that in 10 minutes if you knew what you're doing, because everybody wants to do it. And companies are actually leaving our country to get their money, not only because our taxes are too high, which we're going to lower, by the way, but companies are leaving our country in order to go and get money that's their money, because there's no way of bringing it in. So we've got a long way to go. But I think at some point it's going to get done. This has been very exciting, this whole process. We started, I was one of 17 people, senators, governors. I've had such great support. Dr. Ben Carson the other day endorsed us. And great guy, wonderful man. And Chris Christie endorsed us. That was so incredible. And today, Pam Bondi came up and endorsed us. She was great, and she is a truly wonderful woman, and the job she's done in Florida is incredible. You know, so many. We've had such incredible support. Paul Ryan called me the other day, tremendous call. I spoke with Mitch McConnell today. We had a great conversation. The fact is, we have to bring our party together. We have to bring it together. We have something happening that actually makes the Republican Party probably the biggest political story anywhere in the world. Everybody's writing about it, all over Europe, all over the world they're talking about it. Millions of people are coming in to vote. This was an example of it today. Many, many more people. I'm looking at the polling booths. I'm looking at different polling booths all around the country where it's up. And the lines are 4, 5, 6 blocks long. And one woman was in there for 40 years. She's been working the polls. And she said, we'd have 2 people here. We'd have 3 people. Now look at the line. And the line looked like it was, you know, long. It was really long. 5 deep and long. And it's just a different thing. We have a great opportunity. And the people that are voting are Democrats are coming in, independents are coming in, and very, very importantly, people that never voted before. It's an incredible thing. I want to pay my respects, by the way, to Todd Palin, Sarah's husband. Sarah was here. She was incredible. She was making a speech on my behalf, and fantastic. Everybody loves her. And what happened is he was in a very bad accident. He's tough as nails. He's going to be fine. But I just want to pay my respects, by the way, to Todd and Sarah. So our theme when we started, and Melania and I came down. Yeah, sit down, everybody, please. I mean, this is Mar-a-Lago. We give you seats. You don't have to stand. I'm looking at all these people. Corey, good job, Corey. Good job. And Hope and our whole squad, right? So when this began, Melania and I said, got to do it. And she was so supportive, and she's been so supportive. It's been amazing. and we have to do it. We came down the escalator, and it was about trade, and it was about borders. And what happened is pretty quickly after that, and we shot right up. I shot right to the top of the polls, and have been leading in the polls almost from the beginning, without fail. We went up in June. Most people said, I'll never run. He's just going to have fun. He's having a good time. This isn't necessarily good. I mean, I'm having a good time. I'm having a very nice time. But you know what? I'm working very hard, and there is great anger. Believe me, there is great anger. One of the broadcasters was saying, is there anger? And I said to him, I'm supposed to say, no, there's not. We love the way things are working. We love the deal you made with Iran. It's wonderful. You give them $150 billion. We get nothing. We love all the deals. The trade deals are wonderful. You lose $500 billion a year with China. We lose $58 billion a year in terms of imbalance. It's a total imbalance. We don't make good deals anymore. We don't win anymore. As a country, we don't win anymore. And they asked, is there anger from your people? There seemed to be. And I said, there is anger. They're not angry people, but they want to see the country properly run. They want to see borders. They want to see good health care. They want to see things properly taken care of. They want our military rebuilt. Our military is in a very bad state. They want it rebuilt. Very, very importantly, and they want the Second Amendment, by the way, protected and protected strongly, and that's going to happen. And you know what they want so badly? They want our veterans taken care of. Our veterans are treated so badly. So we started, and something happened called Paris. Paris happened, and Paris was a disaster. There've been many disasters, but it was Paris. And then we had a case in Los Angeles where it was in California where the 14 young people were killed, and it just goes on and on and on. And what happened with me is this whole run took on a whole new meaning. Not just borders, not just good trade deals, and we're going to make the best trade deals you've ever seen. We've got such endorsements from Carl Icahn, the smartest people in business, and these people are going to be negotiating our deals, and they're the best in the world. We have the best business people in the world. They're going to know we're going to have such great deals. We're going to do so good with trade. We're going to do so good on the border. But it took on a whole new meaning. And the meaning was very simple. We need protection in our country, and that's going to happen. And all of a sudden, the poll numbers shot up. And I'm just very proud to be a part of this. I think we're going to go, and we're going to do a lot of trips over the next month, but I think we're going to have a great victory. And I think more importantly than anything else, we are going to start winning again. This country is going to start winning again. We don't win anymore.
We're going to start winning again. Well, we'll see about that. I'm joined here in the studio by my colleague, Charlotte Potts. Charlotte is one of our political correspondents, and you were also a reporter in the U.S. on the campaign trail in 2008 and 2012. Great to have you here with your analysis. And we have Ines Pohl joining us from Washington. Ines has been crisscrossing America in recent months, hot on the campaign trail, following the candidates. Guys, you heard what Trump said. Is he unstoppable now? Is he the inevitable winner of the Republican nomination?
He certainly thinks so himself. He sounded very, very confident there in his speech. I mean, he is taking away a lot of wins tonight. Kasich won Ohio, but that seems to be the only state that Trump is losing tonight. So it does seem like he is unstoppable, and his speech was tapping again into that frustration and into that anger of the voters that have been voting for him. So he clearly goes on with that path.
Yeah, I want to come back and talk about that in a minute. But of course, Trump did take the big prize of the night, Florida. Ines, break this down for us. How did Trump manage to beat the Florida senator on his home turf?
Well, you know, he's just like able to offer solutions which probably won't work, but which people love to believe in. He's like presenting himself as a strongman, as a leader. And Marco Rubio, one has to say that he really has had many weak moments during this campaign. So people just obviously love this strong leadership, what Donald Trump is able to put up.
Now, you mentioned, of course, that Kasich won his home state of Ohio. It's the only state he's won in the entire primary, and yet he is still in the race. Marco Rubio, of course, is not. He dropped out after losing his home state. So we've got Cruz, Trump, Kasich. Is it still a three-way race in any aspect?
It will stay that way for now, definitely. I mean, Kasich, people told him in the beginning he wouldn't even make it to Ohio. Now that he's won the state, he will certainly not drop out tomorrow. The question is, what then? How many states is he actually able to win? Certainly, the Republican establishment would like to see him go further, so they might throw their financial support behind him now. We can't forget about Cruz. He's still in the running, and he has a lot of delegates at this point. He has not won many states, but in terms of collecting delegates, he's been very successful. So he's still a strong candidate, and the race is certainly not over yet.
It's certainly not. Inez, what about Ted Cruz? Where is he in all of this?
Well, the big problem really is that there is no really a second person in the Republican field. It is Donald Trump. Yes, indeed, there has been Kasich tonight. There is Ted Cruz here and there, but no one from not Ted Cruz, not Kasich are really candidates who can be the strong seconds, who would be able to beat this man, Donald Trump, who is such a gifted politician. Just listening to his speech, the way he got immediately into the whole job issue, knowing precisely that this is the weak point of Hillary Clinton, where she might be bet by Bernie Sanders. So he is such a gifted politician, and this is Ted Cruz not in any regard.
You mentioned, he's already taking on some of Hillary Clinton's talking points, very much gearing up for the national stage. But what about the Republican Party leadership? They notoriously don't really like Trump, but they don't like Cruz either. Inez, where does that leave them? Between a rock and a hard place, it would seem.
That's a way to put it. I mean, this is really a classical dilemma for the Republican Party. Should they, by the end, support a candidate which really is not following democratic rules, by overruling democratic rules, if they really open up the convention and bring in another candidate? So this, I don't know how they will solve it without really harming their own party crucially. Probably they have to go with Trump by the end of the day. I can't believe that they, in an open convention, really will overrule the candidate with the most votes he got. So this will be tough, especially as there is no real second choice.
Yeah, Inez, it is looking more and more like it's going to be a Clinton-Trump matchup. Charlotte, what kind of race can we look forward to if those do indeed turn out to be the two candidates?
It's certainly going to be very nasty. I think Trump is already collecting every skeleton in the closet he can find with Hillary Clinton. Clinton has made clear time and time again that she has that expertise and that experience. She mentioned in a speech a couple of days ago that she was Secretary of State, and as that, foreign leaders are still approaching her up to today, asking her to go strong against a possible candidate Trump, and if they could endorse her as world leaders so they could prevent a nomination or a President Trump. So it's certainly going to be a very nasty, a very long campaign, and hopefully we will hear more about issues that are, relevant to America than we've heard coming out of these primaries.
Absolutely. Well, one of the issues incredibly relevant to America, Hillary Clinton addressed tonight, speaking to supporters in West Palm Beach. Let's take a listen.
Now, today, all of you in the states where contests were held voted to break down the barriers that hold us all back so every one of us can share in the promise of America. You voted. You voted for our tomorrow to be better than our yesterday. Tomorrow where all of us do our part and everyone has a chance to live up to his or her God-given potential.
Inez, Hillary is sounding pretty upbeat and pretty presidential there. I'd like to get your take on that.
She does indeed. This is a big night with her clear wins, but we also have to keep in mind she lost Michigan, and it is close in Illinois. Even if she probably wins this state, it is a state with many workers, with blue-collar people whom she needs if she really wants, by the end of the day, win the race. And she knows that she still has to fight Sanders in these states because he won't stop running against her. So yes, it is a big night. It is a huge success for her. But I would say this race is not over yet.
Is Bernie pushing her to the left?
He certainly is. I mean, he made clear tonight in his speech that he actually will keep on fighting. He also has pushed her for sure to the left. She's talking a lot about social justice these days, which is on everybody's mind. I mean, the median incomes have been falling after the financial crisis, and that is certainly something that people want to hear and want to discuss from her.
All right, well, let's hear from Clinton one more time.
We're going to stand up for the American middle class again. We're going to stand up for American workers and make sure no one takes advantage of us. Not China, not Wall Street, and not overpaid corporate executives.
That's really a page from the Sanders playbook, isn't it? If Hillary Clinton wins all of the states tonight, would that show that she's overcome some of the hurdles she initially had with young, white, millennial voters?
I'm not sure about that. I think Bernie Sanders still has the majority of the young vote behind him, especially if we move to states further west going on in the primaries that are very heavy on liberal young voters, like Washington State or Oregon, for example. But Clinton certainly has made so many gains that her nomination is quite inevitable at this point. Bernie Sanders has a chance to push her a little more to the left on some issues in these primaries, but I think at this point it's nearly impossible for her not to become the nominee anymore.
I think a lot of people share that opinion. Well, Bernie could push her left, but let's turn now to a man who has been pushed completely out of the race. As we mentioned earlier, Republican candidate Marco Rubio has suspended his campaign after he lost his home state of Florida to Donald Trump. Let's listen now how he broke the news to his supporters.
While it is not God's plan that I be president in 2016 or maybe ever, and while today my campaign is suspended, the fact that I've even come this far is evidence of how special America truly is. And all the reason more why we must do all we can to ensure that this nation remains a special place.
Well, that was Marco Rubio speaking earlier in Miami. Let's pull in our colleague, Richard Walker. Richard, you are standing there on the scene of a event for Marco Rubio, completely empty there in the background. I dare ask, what's the mood?
Well, Sarah, the mood would certainly be very different if, of course, Marco Rubio had managed to win his home state. He stood behind me really just not very long ago, making that statement after taking that astonishing defeat by Donald Trump. Almost 20 percentage points between them. We really have witnessed the collapse of the campaign of a man who, for a very long time, was seen as the savior of the Republican Party. The cover of Time magazine just a couple of years ago presented as the savior of the party, the hope of the party, someone who could bring in entirely new demographic groups to support the Republican Party, stood up on that podium behind me just earlier saying that he was suspending his campaign, despite having said earlier in the day that he might soldier on if he lost his home state. I think it was pretty clear to everybody here that this was very likely to happen.
And Richard, you know, you've been following these guys for months. Where did Rubio go wrong? I mean, he's a young guy. He has a very inspiring sort of biography. Why couldn't he appeal to voters, even at home?
Yeah, it is extraordinary. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons, and people are going to be thinking about this and studying this for a while, I think. I think part of the problem is, of course, his sort of optimistic, positive message jarred a little bit with the times that we appear to be in. Donald Trump striking a much stronger chord with those tones of anger that we just heard talked about just earlier there. Marco Rubio also, was somebody who was seen as somebody who could unite the Republican Party, who could appeal to its different wings, perhaps better than anybody anybody else. But that also made him a less distinctive candidate. Unlike Donald Trump, you know exactly what kind of a person he is. Ted Cruz is far more conservative, so the really trenchant conservatives flock to him. John Kasich, who just won Ohio, distinctly moderate, very experienced. And Marco Rubio's sort of positioning ended up not being quite as clear as those people. But there were also strategic problems, tactical problems. There was the debate that he performed in very badly just before the New Hampshire primary. That seemed to have cost him votes there. And also the fact that he was basing his strategy around winning his home state of Florida, which voted, of course, today quite late in the primaries campaign. And if you don't win any states building up to that, then you start not looking like a winner, and that was part of the problem. He simply didn't look like a winner by the time it got to his home state.
You have to win, of course, and Donald Trump did. How did he do that in Florida? I mean, it was a quite decisive victory for him there.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a decisive victory, but signs have been pointing in that direction for many weeks already. Donald Trump has been leading Marco Rubio in the polls here in double digits for quite a long time. And simply his message here, a very clear message that we've been hearing about over and over again: make America great again, strengthen the borders, bring American jobs back to this country. That's simply a message that is really resonating. And not just here in Florida, we're seeing actually a tick up. If you look at the results that we've been getting today, here in Florida, 45%. In other states voting today, also around the 40% mark. Now, what you're seeing there is potentially a rise in his support. Many people thought that he had what they were calling a ceiling in the mid-30s. Earlier, they were saying his ceiling was around 30%. What we're seeing is Donald Trump's ceiling actually creeping up as this primaries process continues. And that, of course, bodes extremely ill for anyone who hopes still to be able to stop him.
All right, Richard Walker there for us at Rubio's campaign event, or what's left of it there in Florida. Charlotte, I got to ask you, you're a seasoned political reporter. What do you attribute Trump's success to? Is it right place, right time, or is there more to him than that?
Yeah, I think there is something that has been building up for a long time. I've talked to a lot of Trump voters who say they love him because he's so authentic and straight to the point. He doesn't touch on political taboos anymore. There's also a sense that he's a strong businessman. So people know him from TV. They know the Trump Towers. They've been growing up with a sense that Trump is a really cool guy. And they believe he's a strong businessman that can kind of turn this country around. So I think these are two really big reasons for his success.
You say he's a really cool guy, but he's also a really angry guy. Do you think that tapped into something in this year's voter psyche?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. We've been seeing it. People have been asked at the polls, what is the main issue? It's the economy. People have just the feeling that they are left behind. It's also immigration. They are scared that the borders are not secure, that America doesn't have its former place in the world anymore. And so these are all big reasons or points that Trump is always touching in his speeches, and he just did that now. Ines Pohl mentioned he's a gifted politician. I think he's a gifted non-politician. He really shows that he has never run for public office, and that he is that political outsider that wants to run against the establishment and really turn around things in Washington. So that's kind of his political strategy at the moment.
As a Trump nomination looks more and more likely, it's interesting now to take stock of his actual policy positions. We don't really know much about them, do we?
No, it's very contradictory, actually. If you look, he was just saying in his speech that he wants to get countries back into the get jobs back into the United States, that he doesn't want to outsource jobs anymore. That is what he's been doing, what his company has been doing all along. And they've been outsourcing jobs to China and to other countries. And now he's been promoting, or in his campaign, the opposite. So he's a very contradictory person on many issues. And we don't really know how that's going to play out in a general election, where he has to also appeal to the mainstream voters.
As he tries to appeal to those voters, thinking about his choice for a VP, for a vice presidential nominee or naming, who do you think he's going to turn to?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think he would need somebody more moderate to appeal to those mainstream voters. One guy I have in mind there is Chris Christie.
I think that's on everyone's mind, isn't it?
Yes, the governor of New Jersey, who has been in several campaign events with Trump in recent months. And he's quite more on the moderate side. He's been, when Christie was still campaigning, he's been doing very positive campaigning. He had good ideas for America. And so that might be a possible VP choice. Others, I'm not sure if Marco Rubio would be available to be turned around to be the VP. Attacks have been very strong from both sides. So we will see who's willing to be Trump's vice president.
I mean, I think the Chris Christie guess is as good as any at this point. I mean, who can forget last Super Tuesday, sort of watching Chris Christie stand next to Donald Trump with that dazed look in his eye as he made the speech. You have to wonder, you know, if there isn't something going on there.
That's true. They might have made some deal behind the scenes already that we don't know about. I know they had a meeting in Trump Tower with their two spouses at some point, and maybe that's when Trump asked him for his support, because Christie actually had been attacking Trump very hard in the debate. So it was such a surprise to me that that he was now campaigning on the side of Trump. But I think the stronger Trump becomes, the more of the Republican establishment just sees him as inevitable and is going to rally up behind him. Because
you do think they'll rally behind him?
At some point, eventually, I think they will, because they have to have some kind of nominee for their party if they ever want to make it against a possible Hillary Clinton in the general election. I mean, they need this civil war that has kind of been starting within the Republican Party to stop before the general election if they want to have really a shot at the presidency.
Does Trump have a shot at the presidency in a Clinton-Trump matchup?
It depends on how much he's going to flip-flop on the issues. I think at this point, if we look at his speeches, he's been stirring up violence at his own rallies. He's been very radical in his rhetoric against immigrants, against Muslims, against poor people. I mean, these are all big voting groups that he would really need in the general election.
Well, it's early days. It's still Super Tuesday #2, but it is looking more and more likely. Charlotte Potts, thank you so much for being in the studio with me and for all of your insightful analysis this evening. We're almost out of time, but here's a reminder of our top story this hour. Hillary Clinton has cemented her status as the overwhelming favorite to win the Democratic presidential nomination. She's on track to claim all 5 states that voted today, and as we mentioned, a good night for Republican frontrunner Donald Trump, too. He's claiming victory in 3 states and has a slim lead in Missouri. That's your news wrap. I'm Sarah Harmon. Thanks for watching. Welcome to DW News, coming to you live from Berlin. The victors and the vanquished in the U.S. presidential sweepstakes. Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton has 3 big states under her belt as she cements her status as the favorite to win the nomination. The Trump train is rolling too. The businessman has claimed Florida, North Carolina, and Illinois. Florida Senator Marco Rubio faces the consequences of a loss on his home turf. Well, welcome to our coverage of the U.S. presidential primaries. I'm Sarah Harmon. 5 states, 20% of the U.S. population, a big package for the remaining candidates. Here's how it's shaping up at this hour. The Trump train rolls, picking up momentum this evening with 3 big wins for the Republican frontrunner: Florida, North Carolina, and Illinois. He may also add Missouri to the win column. Just a few thousand votes separate him from challenger Ted Cruz. As expected, Ohio Governor John Kasich won his home state. And moving on to the Democratic 2016 race, where frontrunner Hillary Clinton puts her stamp on 3 big states too: Florida, North Carolina, and Ohio. At this hour, she maintains a slim lead in Illinois, while challenger Bernie Sanders might yet eke out a win in Missouri. Well, with me now in the studio is my colleague Charlotte Potts. She's a political correspondent. You covered the elections in 2008 and 2012 in the states. Let's talk in broad terms what this evening has brought so far.
It's been a very good night for Hillary Clinton and for Donald Trump so far. We've seen Trump winning in 3 states so far, Clinton also in 3, projected to win in another one in Illinois. So those 2 campaigns have really gained a strong momentum here. And I don't want to say that they are going to become the nominee of their party, but it does certainly look more likely after tonight.
It really does. And as we mentioned earlier, the Republican candidate Marco Rubio has suspended his campaign after losing his home state of Florida. I asked our correspondent Richard Walker, who was at that announcement, where Rubio went wrong and how he lost his former high flyer status.
While it is not God's plan that I be president in 2016 or maybe ever, and while today my campaign is suspended, the fact that I've even come this far is evidence of how special America truly is. And all the reason more why we must do all we can to ensure that this nation remains a special place.
That's right. He was on the cover of Time magazine just a couple of years ago, being presented as the savior of the Republican Party, the man who would lead the Republicans, opening up new groups of supporters, Latinos, for instance. He might have become the first Latino president. Now, just behind me in this hall that you see in the background here, he announced that he was finally suspending his campaign. Now, there are a huge number of reasons for this. I think we can't really go into all of them now, ranging from strategic ones like pinning his hopes on winning the Florida primary, even after weeks and weeks of not managing to win other states. So maybe putting too much hope in the idea of winning a state that was his own without trying to build up victories on the road to that. But also, I think in a year of extremely big personalities, of course, Donald Trump, the biggest of all, a very distinctive guy, you know where he stands. Ted Cruz, a very stern, staunch conservative, someone who appealed to evangelical voters. John Kasich, increasingly emerging as the kind of moderate's choice and experienced governor. Marco Rubio didn't really manage to carve out a really clear niche for himself in this race. And he was also somebody who wanted to kind of run on foreign policy in a year when he saw U.S. foreign policy as somewhat disintegrating, but he seemed to be harking back to an earlier era to a neoconservative sort of interventionist form of foreign policy, whereas the likes of Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, a little bit more about American retrenchment, and that seems to be where the heart of the Republican Party is right now. So a multiplicity of reasons for you there. There's plenty more to talk about as well. But obviously, all in all, it didn't come together, and a huge disappointment for this man, Marco Rubio. But at age 44, he's still young. He can still do plenty in his career.
Let's talk about how Trump did there in Florida, because he didn't just win, he won decisively. What did Trump do right in Florida?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, I mean, this was more than just a win. It was the biggest win of the night that he had, and it was pretty well a landslide. But I think what we've seen here is just his message really driving home with people here in Florida, a message about making America great again. Everyone knows that slogan now all over the world. A message about tightening up the borders. You might think that Florida being a state with a great many immigrants, that it might not be so receptive to such a message, but of course many of those immigrants here are Cubans. They are natural Republicans. Many of the Cuban Americans we've spoken to here have reinforced exactly that message. They want tighter border controls. They want jobs brought back to the United States. All of these kind of very, very simple messages that have fueled the Trump campaign all over the country really obviously had a big impact here in Florida, winning him some 45% of the vote. But don't forget, in other states voting today, also above that 40% mark. And I think that is a sign that Donald Trump's overall support does seem to be creeping higher. Many people thought that that he had a kind of ceiling to his support because he was such a controversial guy that he wouldn't manage to maybe break above 35% in many states. Now he seems to be getting quite a few states with 40+%. And of course, that is a very bad omen for anyone who wants to stop him. It does appear that his support is not dwindling but growing as this process goes on.
Let's talk about people who want to stop him. I mean, the GOP leadership notoriously does not like Trump. Are they going to be forced to accept him now after such decisive wins in a key state?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a furious debate going on within the Republican Party at the moment, within this kind of group that's sort of nebulously referred to as the establishment. You do have some people beginning to say, look, it makes no sense to kind of drift into a civil war over Donald Trump. He's a guy who's winning. He's a winner. He's attracting new voters to the Republican Party, maybe not the voters who they wanted to attract in the first place. It's time to fall in line. But there are plenty of others who say, no, we have to fight to the bitter end. We have to fight in a contested convention this July. And if that happens, civil war in the Republican Party is inevitable.
Richard, we know you'll be on the ground covering all of that for us, come what may. For now, thank you so much for your insights. Well, Charlotte, I want to dig a little bit deeper on this Trump phenomenon with you. All of the candidates addressed supporters as the results came in, including Republican frontrunner Donald Trump, and he was typically brash, playing to his audience of ardent supporters and poking fun at the press. Let's take a listen now to the end of that speech.
So again, I just want to congratulate everybody. This is a really interesting process. It's an amazing process. It's very tough, but it is by the end, if you get to the end, you can handle a lot of things, including pressure. That I can tell you, because there's nothing like it. Lies, deceit, viciousness, disgusting reporters, horrible people. Sure. Some are nice. Some are nice. Some really disgusting people back there, I have to tell you. And I just want to say we're going to go forward and we're going to win. But more importantly, we're going to win for the country. We're going to win, 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 and we're not stopping. We're going to have great victories for our country. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Charlotte, the disgusting reporter comment aside, which I know we're both going to put out of our minds and not be offended by, Trump, he's really capitalized on the anger and the frustration in America right now. How exactly did he do that?
It's very interesting. Yeah, there is a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, and I think he's repeating very simple messages to very complex problems. I mean, one of the key issues that's on every American's mind is always, of course, the economy, but he really managed to speak to those middle-class voters, to working-class voters, giving them the message that he will make their lives better and that there will be real progress. Another key issue is immigration. He's been very strong on that. He's been saying that he wants to build a border to keep people out.
A wall, I think, to Mexico.
Exactly,
which
a
Mexico
wall.
is meant to pay for.
Yes, exactly. So he's been really tapping into that fear of a diverse America, of more immigrants coming in, demographic changes, and he's also tapping into a frustration with Washington and the establishment politics. Washington, in the view of some voters, doesn't get anything done anymore. The politicians are doing their work too slow and too inefficient. And Trump, as a non-politician, as somebody who was never in an elected office before, he really represents that anti-establishment.
Do you see his rise, if you will, as part of a wave of populism? You know, we've seen a lot of populism in Europe in the last year, the AfD here in Germany, the Front National in France and elsewhere. Do you think he's part of that, or is this more of a cult of personality?
I think it is both. There is a cult of personality certainly surrounding the leaders of these populist movements, Trump even more so. But it is the same kind of frustration and anger at the establishment politicians, at that things are not going well in the economy, in the country, that people feel left behind. And that's exactly what those populists on the right are tapping into. But not only on the right. I mean, we see Bernie Sanders tapping into exactly that frustration from the left side and offering more socialist solutions to the problems.
And both have been criticized for offering solutions that aren't realistic, and yet Trump's feel especially far-fetched. And I think that's concerning, especially to the GOP base, because they really have no idea what his stance actually is on so many key issues.
Yeah, that's a real problem. He's very contradictory. I mean, at some point he supported abortion, then he was against it when he was starting his campaign. So there are many issues that he's been very undecisive and very flip-flopping. His voters don't really seem to mind, which is very surprising. But there is this one example that he has been outsourcing many jobs within his business, within his Trump empire, to China and other countries. And now he's saying in his campaign that he wants to get jobs back to America. So these kind of things, we will have to see how that will turn out in the general election, when he has to make a clear point on his issues.
Well, the nomination is not in the bag yet, but he is having a very good night. Someone else who's having a very good night, of course, Hillary Clinton. Her campaign event in Florida, very upbeat, and her showing extends her lead in the race for the Democratic nomination. Let's listen now to a few sound bites from her speech earlier to supporters.
Now, today, all of you in the states where contests were held voted to break down the barriers that hold us all back so every one of us can share in the promise of America. You voted. You voted for our tomorrow to be better than our yesterday. Tomorrow, where all of us do our part and everyone has a chance to live up to his or her God-given potential. We're going to stand up for the American middle class again. We're going to stand up for American workers and make sure no one takes advantage of us. Not China, not Wall Street, and not overpaid corporate executives.
A page right out of the Bernie Sanders playbook there. I mean, middle class, calling out Wall Street there. Has Bernie Sanders pushed Hillary further to the left?
Yes, I think if Bernie Sanders' campaign, if in the end he doesn't make it, has done anything, then for sure pushed Hillary Clinton on the left in so many issues, be it minimum wage, so issues of social justice, incarceration of African-American men, and those are just a few examples. Yeah, Hillary Clinton was just in this soundbite touching on Wall Street. That's been one of the main attacks coming from Sanders, that Hillary Clinton is paid by Wall Street, that she's thereby corrupted by the financial class in America. So these are things that she will have to address in the course of her campaign. But I think she's becoming like the champion of the middle class in her campaign, or at least that's how she's been portraying herself. And that has apparently sat well with voters in Ohio tonight, which Sanders had a lead before, but she ended up winning.
Now, one thing that Bernie Sanders' campaign did really well was mobilizing young, millennial, particularly white voters. Do you think the Clinton success we're seeing this evening is evidence that she has managed to capture some of that demographic?
Yes, a little bit. I think that as we move further west, the next primaries will be, for example, in Oregon and Washington State. So all of those states in the West that tend to be more liberal and have a lot of young voters. We will see how it turns out for Hillary. Those are usually the strong Sanders base, and they like Sanders because he's been very specific on what he wants to, for example, get down the college loans and make college more affordable and these kind of things. So we'll have to see if she manages to get that excitement from those young voters that Bernie Sanders is getting right now.
The Democratic nomination process has been incredibly tame. The debates have been tame, particularly compared to the Republican slugfest. Do you think because of the very adult nature of the discourse between Sanders and Clinton, there's a chance we'll see them working together, whether it's a cabinet position or potentially Sanders on a VP ticket?
I think it would be a very interesting choice of Hillary. I have somebody in mind for Hillary, which I touch on later, but Bernie Sanders would certainly bring in that young vote and that kind of excitement that she needs for her campaign. Another possible vice president might be Julian Castro. He's of Mexican descent. He's now the Secretary of Urban Development, and he would certainly get that minority vote that she will also very much need in the general election.
She does well with minorities are well, though.
Yeah, she does. She does. African Americans especially, but I think that Mexican vote is going to be very decisive in this general election, since that electorate is growing more and more. It's going to be 30% of non-white voters in the next general election. So he would certainly be a good candidate for that.
Demographic changes in America are going to play a very interesting role in the race, whoever takes the nomination, although Clinton is looking likely as the Democratic nominee this evening. Charlotte Potts, thank you so much for your insights. Well, DW News will bring you special coverage of the run-up to November's presidential election, and you can get a whole lot more on the campaigns by going to dw.com/US Elections 2016. We've also been asking folks what sort of America they'd like to see, and you can join in that debate on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatAmerica. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Well, turning now to some other world news. Efforts to bring peace to Syria appear to be gathering pace. UN.
Hello and welcome. This is DW News live from Berlin. It's Super Tuesday, Mark II. 5 states voting, that's 20% of the US population, in Republican and Democratic presidential primaries that could cement the leads of the two frontrunners. Polls have just closed in large parts of Florida. North Carolina and Ohio follow in the next half hour. Our special coverage begins right now. My name's Christopher Springate. Good to have you with us. Welcome to another round of the US presidential sweepstakes. We're going to start off with the key state of Florida. It spans 2 time zones, so we're hoping to have projections for you in just a moment. First, have a look at just how much is on the line over the next few hours. Donald Trump, the billionaire businessman, could sweep all 5 states, Ohio, Florida, Illinois, North Carolina and Missouri, and that could force some of his rivals out of the race. But Ohio Governor John Kasich, he could eke out a victory in his home state. Meanwhile, Senator Marco Rubio trails Trump by a big margin in his home state of Florida. And among the Democrats, Hillary Clinton looks poised to make further gains against rival Bernie Sanders, also in Florida. OK, while we wait for those projections, I have Charlotte Potts with me in the studio, one of our political correspondents. We just talked about Marco Rubio in those pictures, Charlotte. He has to win his home state, Florida, doesn't he?
Yeah, he really has to. It's its own backyard, and a win for him is make it or break it tonight. If he doesn't, he might not drop out of the race, but his financial backers will certainly revisit the question if they want to support him in the long term. So, yeah, Florida is everything for him tonight.
And if he loses, he's out?
He might be out. The only way for him to stay in the race is to get a few more votes or delegates from Trump. I don't think he, as I said, has the financial backing to make it much longer in the long term. And the GOP establishment, the Republican establishment, which supported him to begin with, they are shying away from him now because they just see that he's not winning any states.
OK, let's talk about the other key state, Ohio. Trump is